Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's vlog is going to be another episode in my series where I am reading my way through Sadie Hartmann's 101 horror books to read before you're murdered. I believe that this should be the third or fourth video. I'm not too sure, depending on upload schedule. You'll be seeing this in October or November, so either way, happy spooky season. Today's episode is going to be all about cryptid horror. Now, I am really excited about this one. There are 5 books mentioned in the cryptid section of this book, and I have not read any of them, which is just really exciting. I don't think that I've read a lot of cryptid horror in general. I know one of these books does mention vampires, so I guess if you count vampires as cryptids, then yes, I have read a lot of cryptid horror, but for the most part, other than that, if I'm thinking about traditional cryptids or even like werewolves, I don't think that I've read a lot of cryptid horror. So I think that this week's reading vlog is going to be a whole lot of fun. So let's go ahead, briefly talk about the 5 books that are in this section, introduce them, and then kick off the vlog. So the first book recommended in this section is Ghoul by Brian Keene. This came out in 2007, and if you've watched these videos, y'all know just in general this year, I am using my library. I'm trying not to buy a lot of books. I'm kind of on a little bit of a no-buy year. So I am depending on my library system to complete this challenge. I could not find Ghoul anywhere, and I have 3 different library cards at the moment. I have access to Libby and Hoopla categories, cannot find this anywhere. However, I did find the movie on Hoopla, so I think that's what we're going to do. Have no fear, at the end of this series, I will try a little bit harder, perhaps even purchase some of these books that I was not able to read during their sections and do some like bonus content for this series. But Ghoul, this is not one that I'm going to be reading, even though I'm intrigued by it. It's coming of age horror, but the movie, I'm intrigued. I know that watching the movie is not the same thing as reading the book, but that's what we have to work with for this vlog. So that is the first selection. We are going to be watching Ghoul at some point during this vlog. Next up, we have In the Valley of the Sun by Davidson. This came out in 2017, and it's a vampire novel. And not just a vampire novel, but it looks like a vampire western. Y'all know me and vampires. I love vampire fiction, so I'm really eager to check this one out. The next book that we're going to be reading for this vlog is The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. This came out in 2022. Mother Horror says that this is a Frankenstein-inspired vibe. This one is Frankenstein adjacent, and I think it has to deal with like a boarding house or some sort of orphanage, and then like those Mary Shelley Frankenstein vibes. So really intrigued about that one. I've heard a lot about this author, and I don't think I've ever read anything by her, so I am excited. The next book that is recommended in this section is Hearts Strange and Dreadful by Tim McGregor. This one came out in 2021. It says that it gives Little House on the Prairie vibes. Unfortunately, I cannot find this one anywhere. This is another one that I'm going to have to seek out at a later date, but we are going to be adding another book to the mix just to get all the way through this book. Not only does this book have sections on different subgenres of horror, but it also has author spotlights, and it gives recommendations for those authors. So I found another cryptid book to read that is featured in one of the author spotlights, and that would be Those Across the River by Christopher Buehlman. This is an author that I've had a very interesting reading journey with. I have loved a book by him. I've not loved 2 books by him. So book number 4, I'm hoping I'm going to love this one. This is about werewolves, and I'm really intrigued. I haven't read a lot of werewolf stories, but the ones that I have read, I tend to have loved. So 4th time's a charm for Christopher Buehlman. I'm holding out hope for this one, and here's hoping that it's going to be a great cryptid story. And then the final book recommended in this cryptid section, and the last book we're going to be reading for this vlog, is The Return by Rachel Harrison. Harrison. This book came out in 2020. Rachel Harrison's actually another author that I have a little bit of like a mixed relationship with when it comes to reading. I've read a couple of her books. I've loved some. I've not really loved others. I believe this could have been her debut. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is about a group of friends who go on this camping expedition. They go to a cabin in the middle of the woods and something strange happens. So those are the books that I'm going to be reading for this vlog. I am actually starting off with The Return by Rachel Harrison. I have this checked out physically from my library and I need to read it. I need to read it and return it because there's a holds list on this one. So that is why we're starting this vlog out with this book. So let's chat The Return. Mother Horror says The Return is Harrison's debut novel about a tight-knit friend group of women who have seen each other through most of life's major milestones. Julie goes off on a solo hiking trip and never returns. Her closest friend in the group never really subscribes to the idea that Julie is gone, even when the other women organize a funeral to celebrate Julie's life. Eventually, Julie's husband comes home to find Julie sitting on their porch with no memory of how she got there or where she's been. Relieved, the group of friends plan a reunion trip at a quirky boutique hotel. It's here they start to notice something is off. This book is a whole vibe about adult friendships and how our early relationships complicate or hinder our transformation. So I'm excited. Let's go ahead, dive into The Return by Rachel Harrison. I'll check back in at the 50% mark and let y'all know how I'm feeling. So I am now 50% of the way through The Return by Rachel Harrison, and maybe this is too early to say, maybe I'm jinxing myself, but this is my favorite Rachel Harrison so far, I think. Why that is, I think this definitely is like the least cozy horror of the books that I've read from her so far. And while I love cozy horror as a concept, it's something that's very, very hit or miss for me. So I definitely think that this could be my favorite of hers that I've read so far. I've read Such Sharp Teeth and Cackle by her, and I enjoyed Such Sharp Teeth better than Cackle. Actually, Cackle was a DNF, so I didn't care for that one, but this one, I'm really, really enjoying it. We're following 4 friends. They've been friends since college, and one of them disappears, and she disappears when she went on a hike in the wilderness at a national park. She is missing for a very long time, and she is declared legally dead. This is a very hard thing for all of her friends to cope with, obviously, but then 2 years after her disappearance, she comes back. She comes back, but even more crazy than that is the fact that she has no recollection. Julie has no recollection of the past 2 years. So what happened to her is just a mystery to her as it is to everyone else. So obviously the friends are overjoyed, they're overcome. This is their best friend, basically back from the dead. So they set up a reunion retreat. To celebrate this reunion, they decide to go to a resort in the middle of the woods. And when they all arrive, they start to suspect that this Julie that disappeared and then came back may not be their Julie, because Julie, she's acting strange. At first, they think maybe this is because of all of the trauma that's happened to her in the past 2 years. Disappearing, losing 2 years of your memory and your life must be traumatic. So they're thinking it might be that, but then her behaviors start to become a little bit more sinister as their time together goes on. Very strange, very erratic behavior, not very Julie-like behavior at all. So our main 3 characters are kind of sitting tight in a resort in the woods, and they're, you know, trying to just have this girl's weekend, and it keeps going horribly awry. So I'm really enjoying this one so far. Our main character, Elise, is really elated to have Julie back because out of the 4 friends, May and Molly, those are the 2 that are closer, and Elise has always felt like she's been closer to Julie. So she is very excited that Julie's back. She never really gave up hope that Julie was like still alive and just missing and would eventually come back. So she should be like the most excited of them all. But because she knows Julie the best, she starts picking up on all of these little things that she feels maybe this Julie is not her Julie. And I'm really loving that setup. What I'm also loving is the resort that these women go to, because this resort, the person who finds it, May, the friend who finds it, did a like photo shoot there. So this resort is very, very kitschy, but very fun. Like each of the different rooms has a very different elaborate theme. There's just like so many different themes. It feels like one of those locations that was like purely designed for Instagram content or just content creation. So this already feels quite liminal space adjacent, because the surroundings are already so outlandish, and when creepy things start to happen, it feels like a little bit more ridiculous having something so creepy happening in a room that's completely turquoise and pink. So I really love the setting. The setting is really cool because I knew that they went to a retreat in the middle of the wilderness, which is already a scary isolated setting for when things go wrong, but just the way that the resort is set up with the different themed rooms and just like this feeling of like a little bit off-putting from the beginning before anything even really happens is really cool. I'm really enjoying this one, and it's very fast-paced. Honestly, once I get done filming this update, I'm gonna sit down and probably read the last 50% because this is very speedy. It feels like thrillery paced. I would definitely say this is horror, but it reads like a thriller because it is very fast-paced. Now, just a caveat, even though I said that, the chapters in this one are very long, so don't go into this one expecting like thriller chapters of a page or two, because I am tandem reading this one. I'm reading the physical and the audio, switching off back and forth because I don't want to put this one down. But the last chapter that I listened to was about 70 minutes long. So the chapters are long, so know that going in, but the pace is very fast and there are some creepy moments. I'm loving the location. I cannot wait to figure out what happens next in this one. So I finished The Return by Rachel Harrison, and this is my favorite Rachel Harrison book that I have read so far. I was doing some research on the bookish corners of Reddit, and I learned that this one and Black Sheep are the least cozy horror, so I think I am going to pick up Black Sheep sometime this year and check it out and hopefully love it as much as I did this one. This was a whole lot of fun. It's horror, but it has a thriller pace, and just the setting was super cool with the kitschy hotel really added to kind of like the liminal space sort of creepiness about the whole situation. I also really enjoyed the cryptid or paranormal horror that was featured in here. I'm not gonna give it away at all, but something is not right about Julie, and I really enjoyed the friends trying to kind of figure that out, because while they are very close-knit, they're very old friends, they've been together for a long time, they do not talk about their feelings. They're very passive aggressive. They usually, and this is mentioned by like a lot of the characters, that they tend to bury like the deep things and don't bring up like really traumatic things or engage in arguments. Like they just, it's kind of surface level in a lot of ways where they don't talk about the big things. So there's this huge Julie-sized elephant in the room as they're going through this vacation where something's not right, and that is part of the tension where they're like, okay, do we bring something up? Something is wrong with Julie, and even if it is just she has experienced a trauma, that is something that needs brought up, but they waffle back and forth on it until it becomes far too late for them to do anything. So I did really enjoy that commentary about, you know, reaching out to people in your circle and talking with your friends and bringing up hard conversations, because, you know, they wanted this to be a fun, joyful retreat. I understand your friend has come back and you thought you'd never see her again and you want to have a fun weekend, but there are some hard conversations. And sometimes recognizing trauma and checking in on your friends and making sure they're okay are just as important, even more important than just having a good time with the girls. So I really enjoyed this one. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm on the Rachel Harrison train. I mean, I never wasn't, but just cozy horror is so hit or miss for me. She's actually an author that I do recommend a lot, even though I hadn't had like the best experiences with her in the past, because I love what she's doing in the horror space with her horror commentary. Just cozy horror doesn't usually hit for me, but I loved this. I'm excited to check out Black Sheep, and I'll also be checking out So Thirsty when it comes out as well, because like I mentioned, she's an author that I think I could like a lot of her books, especially if they're more like this one where they're less cozy horror and more like traditional horror. So I definitely had a lot of fun with this one, and now we are moving on to the next book in this vlog, which is going to be The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. The Children on the Hill came out in 2022, and Mother Horror says it is so many things at once. A psychological thriller with a dark mystery at its core and plenty of horror elements. McMahon riffs with a Frankenstein-inspired vibe, combining the nostalgia of coming of age with the spooky tones of a well-plotted mystery while asking the age-old question: who is the monster, the creator, or the creation? So I am very intrigued. This sounds like it's going to be a Frankenstein-inspired story. I've also heard that this one has a little bit of a podcast element to it, maybe. There's definitely at least dual timelines, so I'm really interested in this one. I'm gonna go get to reading, and I will check back in at the 50% mark and let y'all know my thoughts. Okay, so I am halfway through The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon, and this is really turning out to be a very middle of the road read for me. I don't have a lot to say about it, so it's gonna be a little bit of a shorter update. We are following two different timelines. The first timeline is in the 1970s, and we are following our main character, Violet. She has a very unconventional upbringing. Her grandmother runs a treatment center, a psychiatric center for the mentally ill. She takes in cases that a lot of people like have given up on, especially for the 1970s. It feels very revolutionary, and Violet's grandmother is doing this and taking care of Violet and her brother. This timeline follows Violet's very unconventional upbringing in the shadows of the psychiatric institution, and then the introduction of a new sister, a new little girl that her grandmother brings to live with Violet and her brother, and they're trying to uncover the secrets about where this little girl came from. Now, we also are following a point of view period in the, I'm guessing what was present day. It takes place in 2017. I think this book came out around then. So 2017, we are following Violet. Now, she has changed her name to Lizzie Shelley for reasons unknown. We're starting to figure that out throughout the story, why she did have a need to change her name, because something traumatic has happened from the last point of view to now. And she has a podcast where she goes around the US hunting for monsters, but one monster in particular. She is enjoying this nomadic podcasting life, but when a young girl goes missing from a location that holds a lot of significance to her and her family and her sister, she goes to investigate and see what's going on and maybe reconnect with family. So when I say that this one is middle of the road, there's nothing bad about it. There's nothing that I'm hating about this book. There's nothing that I'm loving and wanting to gush about this book either. I'm just reading it. So that's really all I have of the update. The way that this is told, I understand why it's being told the way that it's told, but this is one that does have two separate timelines, and I am a lot more invested in one of those timelines than the other, which can be a little bit hard to get through. There was also something introduced that is in the 45% mark, so it was right before I had to stop and give this update, that I'm really nervous about how it's going to be handled handled and how it's going to integrate within the story. It's not something that's an automatic DNF for me or anything like that, but I was just so taken aback by this being introduced as a plot element because from any synopsis that I've ever heard about this book, I have not heard this aspect being mentioned, and I think it's a very, like, potentially could be very triggering kind of theme. So trigger warning, skip past 5 seconds if you don't want to hear it, but they're introducing eugenics, and more specifically the United States movement of eugenics, especially when it comes to people who are mentally ill. So was not expecting any of that. I'm nervous to see how much of that is going to be in the second 50%, but overall this is going good. I don't have any complaints. I don't have anything that I'm exactly gushing about either, but I'm gonna go finish this one up, read the last 50% of this book, and then I'll come back on here and let y'all know my final thoughts on this one. Okay friends, so I finished The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon, and the latter 50% really felt for me the same as the first 50%, which that is to say, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it was just okay. The middle for this one really sagged a bit, that the ending picked back up, and definitely the last 50% of this one gets more into the horror, gets more into the horrific things that happen to our main characters at this institution that doubles as their home. Now, for me, I love Frankenstein. I will say it's very rare for me to find a Frankenstein retelling, reimagining, or a book that's heavily inspired by it that I end up really liking, which is weird. Like, I love Dracula, and I do tend to appreciate a good Dracula retelling. I have a lot of luck finding books that are retellings or reimaginings of Dracula that I end up liking. For whatever reason, I just have not found a book that really sparks the same magic that Frankenstein by Mary Shelley has done for me. So this one, I knew kind of going into it, it was going to be a Frankenstein, not retelling, but just a book heavily inspired by Frankenstein and kind of playing around with Frankenstein. Again, one of the main characters, the last name is Shelley as she reinvents herself. So, you know, it's very heavily there that this is inspired by Frankenstein. Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, the movies, are mentioned in this a lot, and this just was a piece of art that was inspired by Frankenstein that just didn't work for me. The only one that I would honestly readily recommend to a lot of people would be Our Hideous Progeny. It's either this or Our Hideous Progeny, and that one is the only Frankenstein. It's not a retelling, it's almost like a spiritual sequel, but that one is the only one that I feel really captures what I loved about Frankenstein. So unfortunately, this one just felt very middle of the road for me. There were also some things that I didn't love that I can't talk about because spoilers, but just the way that the ending concluded and wrapped up, I didn't necessarily love it. There was a twist that I didn't mind the twist, but I didn't like how it was executed. And then this one's getting a little bit nitpicky, but there was like a romance really shoehorned in on like one page that I didn't love. Not every book needs to have romance, and this one was doing just fine without it. Like, it wasn't even a romance, but it was just a weird romantic moment that didn't need to be there. So overall, this is like a middle of the road book for me. It's definitely, I've read a lot of great Gothic books this year, honestly, so it could just be that it had some very heavy competition this year, but I didn't unfortunately enjoy it, and that's really all I have to say about it. It was okay. If you like this author, I do think that you would like this book. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. It just wasn't the book for me. So we are moving on, and we are actually moving on to a movie, and that is going to be the movie adaptation of Brian Keene's Ghoul. Again, this is one I would love to revisit and read the book, but all I can find is the movie adaptation, so we're gonna go ahead and watch it. This is a coming-of-age horror. It's 1984, and three 12-year-old boys are looking forward to spending the summer in their hidden fort, eating junk food, reading comics, and talking about girls. Things are going according to plan until the boys are faced with having to battle an ancient terror that has taken up residence in their town cemetery. Since this is a movie and not a book, I'm not going to give a 50% update. I'm just gonna watch the movie, and then I'll check back in later when I'm done with it, let y'all know my thoughts. So I watched Ghoul and I did not like it at all, unfortunately. I'm not going to delve too much into it because I just don't think that it was a great viewing experience, and I did go on Letterboxd and read through every single review that was posted for this movie, which was not a lot. This is a very small budget film, and you can really tell that when you're watching it. It had like very low budget, and just like the acting and the cinematic effects and all of that, very low budget. Not a lot of people got to see it. I almost wonder if this was like a direct to DVD release with just the low budget aspects of this film. But I was reading through the reviews, and every single review that mentioned the book said that this was a horrible adaptation and that the book is so much better. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this movie and the ways in which I didn't like it and it disappointed me, because it's not fair to Ghoul as a work of art. And I mean Ghoul the book by Brian Keene, because I mean I could not find a single positive review that mentioned that they had read the book, and the people who had read the book rated this like half stars or 1 stars and saying that it just handled things really poorly and just was not a great adaptation. So yeah, I tried to watch Ghoul. We'll try and read Ghoul later on in this series when I can hunt down a copy of it, but that was kind of an experiment that didn't go well for me. So we are moving on. We're moving back to books, and we are reading In the Valley of the Sun by Andy Davidson. Travis Stillwell is a mysterious young man who is seriously caught up in some bad business. He has a Texas Ranger hunting him down, which I wish I could say is the worst thing hunting him. Unfortunately, something far more dangerous has an eye on him as well. Mother Horror says that Davidson's storytelling voice is so confident and self-assured. The narrative has a smooth pace and natural rhythm. It's a dark, pitch-black story that reaches far back enough into everyone's past so that nobody feels like a villain, and yet there are villainous acts, there is wickedness. And I do believe that based just on the cover of this one that this has to deal with vampires, so a vampire western is very intriguing to me. I'm gonna go get to reading it. I will check back in at the 50% mark and let y'all know my thoughts. So I am now 50% of the way through In the Valley of the Sun by Andy Davidson, and this one is going okay for me, unfortunately. I say unfortunately just because I was hoping that this one would be like an instant hit for me. Has to deal with vampires. I love vampire novels. I've also read another book by Andy Davidson before and I loved it, so I thought it was going to be a really fun experience diving into his debut. I was really optimistic about the subject matter and an author that I had read from and liked from before. Unfortunately, like this one is just, it's putting me in a little bit of a reading slump, and that's not because it's an awful book or it's a book that I am hating, but I do not have the motivation to ever pick this one up. I started this book about a week ago. It's less than 400 pages and I just hit the 50% mark last night. I like a slow moving book. I am not intimidated by larger books, and this isn't even like a larger book, but it's going really slowly. The pacing is just really difficult for me to get through. I think another large reason that maybe I'm having some difficulties with this one is that the chapters are so long. And in fact, there's really not like traditional chapter breaks. There are days that the events in the novel are broken up into, but when I'm looking at least because I am reading it as an ebook on my phone, the only like dividers of chapters are the section dividers. So you'll have just a long stretch of time before you get any sort of divide in moving on to the next section. So it's not like there are like quick, speedy chapters that you could go through and, you know, kind of motivate yourself, especially when you're not really clicking with the book, you're not really loving it. So this one is, we're following a variety of characters. I would say our main character is Travis in this one. Travis is not a great person. He has killed women before. At the very beginning of this novel, you see him try to pick up this mysterious woman at a bar, and you presume that he is going to try and murder her as well. However, this encounter does not go as planned. It turns out he was not being the hunter in this scenario, but rather the hunted, as the woman has a plan of her own, and she transforms him into something with an insatiable bloodlust. So Travis is trying to go through this transformation all by himself. He has no idea what's going on. He's trying to figure things out. He feels like he's losing his mind, and he also is getting help from a mother and her son. They run this motel. He manages to park his trailer in the parking lot of their motel that they own, and that's how these characters meet. And Annabelle, who owns the motel, sees that Travis is really down on his luck. She senses that something's wrong and he's a little bit of a lost soul, so she offers him odds and ends, little work jobs, so that he can pay for his spot in the parking lot with his trailer, first of all, and then also just to help him get back on his feet. So they have that very uneasy relationship there because Travis is no good. Annabelle's kind of getting vibes that he's no good, but she's also a good person. She's trying to help him out at the same time raising her son by herself. We're also following a sheriff named Reader, and he is trying to find out who killed all of these women. He is hot on the trail of Travis, but he is not the only one who is stalking and circling and coming closer and closer to Travis. The vampire who turned him also has some plans for him and wants to be in his life. For me, I think one of my biggest issues is that I don't love Travis as a main character, and we spend the most amount of time in Travis's point of view. We see what he's thinking, what he's feeling, how he's going about his day. He's just the least compelling character. He's not a great person, which I don't mind. I don't have to read likable protagonists every single time, but he just is just so melancholic and just not like fully fleshed out. He seems very one-dimensional in his motivations and the things that he does. He's just not that exciting to read about, and we get a ton from his perspective. Every single time that we get a new point of view, like we get the point of view of the vampire Rue, or we get Annabelle, or we get Reader, the story picks up and the momentum starts getting better for me, but then it's not a lot of page time with any of those characters, and we quickly switch back to Travis, who is just not that exciting. All of the other characters have momentum, they have things that they are doing, they have like more realized character arcs than Travis. So every time that we read from the point of view of someone else, they just feel like more fleshed out characters. They have more motivation, they have more intention, and the pacing is so much better, but then we switch back to Travis and it kind of goes to a standstill. So this one is hard for me to get through. I am going to finish it. There's nothing like wrong with the prose or anything like that. I will say what I've read from Andy Davidson, this is not his best work, but it's a debut, so that's okay. I can definitely see from this book how he has improved his craft since this book. So I don't know. Here's hoping that the second half of this book picks up for me. I'm gonna go finish it up and I will check back in later with another reading update. Okay friends, so I finally finished In the Valley of the Sun by Andy Davidson, and I unfortunately just didn't really click with this one. This one is a book where I didn't personally enjoy it, but I can definitely see the audience for this book and people who love this book, and checking Storygraph, I see a ton of people really love this book, and I totally see why, because I've read something from Andy Davidson before and really loved it. I just didn't get that same magic here, and that's okay. Not every book has to work for every reader, but if you like very, for lack of a better word, grimdark, very pessimistic horror stories and, you know, vampire, because this is heavily about vampires, so if you like vampires but kind of set in a more Western setting, then I think you could really like this book. I do like the kind of experimental way that this was told at points. I just think it is a technique that the author has improved upon in his later book that I've read, so I am excited to still read the Boatman's Daughter, I think, is the only other book I haven't read by this author. This is by no means like I'm reading this and writing the author off. It just didn't work for me. I didn't like how the ending was executed either, and just it was really hard for me to buy into Travis as our protagonist. I think if we had followed other characters more than Travis, or even if they would have gotten the same amount of page time as Travis, I think I could have ended up liking this more. There is a scene about the 70 or 80% mark of this novel that I loved. That was perfection, and not to give too much away, but it is the scene where Reader, our investigator who's trying to figure out this series of murders, is at an examiner's room with a medical examiner there. They are examining this dead body, and that scene, so chilling. The scene right after, it's so chilling. I wanted more of that, because when this book is good, there are glimmers of prose and things that happen that I was like, this is great, I like this, but unfortunately it just didn't work cohesively for me. Another thing that I just felt kept getting more prevalent as the book kept going. This is set in the 80s, and it's written like it was written in the 80s, which is very unfortunate if you are reading a description about any person of color or a woman, because the most horrifying moments in this book to me were not actually the vampire parts, but the parts where we are in depth describing war crimes, or describing people of color, or describing underage girls and their bodies and what they look like. That was horrifying, but not for the way that it was intended. This gets very dark. I would say if you're going to pick this up, know that it's a very pessimistic ride, and trigger warnings for abuse of all kinds. A lot of these characters come from very horrific backgrounds, as well as there's a lot of incest and a lot of pedophilia. So just know that going in. If those are hard no's, then I just would skip this one altogether. I wanted to love this one, I didn't, and that is unfortunate. But we are moving on to the last book in this vlog, and I'm gonna be switching it up. I know I said at the beginning of this vlog I was going to read Those Across the River by Christopher Buehlman. However, this vlog, now I've had a really good book in this vlog. I liked the Rachel Harrison a lot. The movie of Ghoul was neither here nor there. We're not really counting that in the tally because it's a movie, not a book. But the other two books that I've read were not really to my personal liking, and not books that I ended up enjoying too much. So I don't want the last book of this vlog to be with an author that I've read 3 books from now and did not like 2 at all and really liked 1. And those are not great odds. I want something that will hopefully turn this vlog around a little bit for me. So we are no longer reading the Christopher Buehlman book. We are actually reading Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. Like I've mentioned before, this book not only has categories of different subgenres of horror, but it also has author spotlights, and Stephen Graham Jones is an author that is spotlighted in this book. He's an author that I have read a lot from before, and I've tended to really love his work. His work really works for me. He has such a compelling and unique voice, and I just feel like if I'm going to read one more book about cryptids in this vlog, it's gotta be Mongrels. It's coming of age horror that has to deal with cultural identity, werewolves, outsiders. Mother Horror says Mongrels is a book about a family of werewolves isolated from other people like them, so they rely on each other to create a sense of place, culture, and identity as werewolves. The central character, a young man, is learning for himself what it means to be who he is. Boys want to belong. They want to feel important and loved for who they are, and they want to have a place in this world. To be noticed is their goal, but not for being different in a negative way. They want to be different in a way that people celebrate. So Mongrels is going to be the very last book in this vlog. I'm really excited to dive into it. I love Stephen Graham Jones, and I have had this on my TBR for quite some time now. So I'm gonna go read Mongrels, and I will check back in at the 50% mark and let y'all know my thoughts. So a little bit of a change of scenery. I am at my parents' house right now, but I am 50% of the way through Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones, and I definitely think that picking this book is going to be a great way to end this vlog. I'm already having not a lot of fun. Fun is not the right word for this story. It's very depressing at times. It's just very gruesome at times as well, but I just think it's such a beautiful and interesting story, and it's really unlike any werewolf book that I have read before. So 50% of the way in, I am absolutely hooked. I was really hooked by the first chapter of this one. We're following our main character, who at this point in time is unnamed, so that's very interesting. But our unnamed protagonist, he lives with his grandfather and his aunt and his uncle, and they are indigenous. They are very, very poor, but they're a close-knit family, and they also have a secret in that they are all werewolves. Well, the grandfather, the aunt, and the uncle are. Our main protagonist is really crossing his fingers and hoping that he becomes a werewolf as well, because this is a family thing, but he hasn't gone through the change yet. The first chapter of this story kicks off with the grandfather telling stories about being a werewolf to his grandson, our protagonist, and our protagonist wants to be a werewolf so bad. And as a reader, at the first chapter, you're kind of agreeing with the protagonist. You understand why he wants to be a werewolf so bad, because, you know, it's a family thing, and honestly, you know, being a werewolf sounds pretty cool. But as you get further and further through the story, you realize like that this being a werewolf is not like a glamorized version of a werewolf. Like, I feel like in some, especially like modern interpretations, a lot of times werewolves, they're a little bit sanitized, for better or for worse. And I definitely think, like, same thing with vampires. There are different kinds of vampires, and sometimes I like a dark and gritty vampire. Sometimes I like a more gothic and romantic type of vampire, but this is very much like a hard life to be in. And in this story, it's very clear that being a werewolf is an allegory for being indigenous. So it's a very hard life being a werewolf, and you see our narrator really grapple with that, learning that his normal is not everyone else's normal, while still wanting to be a werewolf, still having that desire to be a part of this culture and community, while still realizing the horrible statistics that come with being a werewolf and the dangers that exist being in a world where you are a werewolf and people treat you differently because you are a werewolf. So obviously a lot of social commentary going on. This also does, like, this does have some very explicit werewolf content. It's not a book like an allegorical book where it's very literary and you don't really get a sense for werewolves. You see transformations, you see werewolves transforming, you get a lot of body horror if you are squeamish about any sort of like body mutilation, body horror, and also just if you get squeamish about harm being done to animals, I would skip this one. I really would. It's really hard to read at times, but I don't think it's ever done in a gratuitous way. Werewolves gotta eat, but there are some unfortunate scenes, especially if you are a dog lover or a bunny lover. So if animal cruelty is, and I hesitate to say cruelty because it's not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but if you don't like graphic scenes involving animals, this probably is not going to be a book for you. This is just like very gritty and very graphic, but I am having a good time reading it. The prose is great. I'm reading it physically. I went back and forth whether to read it physically or via audio. I just found for this one, I'm really enjoying reading it physically. So 50% of the way in, I'm enjoying my time. I like our narrator, even though he's unnamed, you really get a sense for who he is as a character, and you also get a sense for his family. They're very dysfunctional, but they're filled with love, and the family dynamics in this one are so engaging and so interesting to read about. So if you like character studies and you are not afraid of a little bit of gore, a little bit, like a lot of gore and a lot of body horror, because this is not an easy transformation, okay? This is like a body horror transformation. If you saw it happen in this book, you'd not be like, oh, cool, werewolves. You'd be like, oh my God, that's horrific. So just keep that in mind. But I am enjoying my time overall. I'm going to go finish this book up and then I'll come on and finish out this vlog. So I finished Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones, and I loved this one. It comes as no surprise to me because I don't think I've ever read a Stephen Graham Jones book that I haven't enjoyed, but this one just really hit everything that I love about Stephen Graham Jones. This was a wonderful werewolf tale. It's coming of age horror that is just explored so well. I know I talked about this in the first 50% update, but it is all about being Indigenous, being Native American, and using like that experience as like a werewolf. So it's an allegorical story, but it works really well. But even though it is werewolves representing the Native American experience in modern day America, there is still werewolf content. It's not like just similes and metaphors and you don't actually get to see werewolves. You do. There's a lot of werewolf transformations, day in the life. This is just everything I could have anticipated or wanted from a book that was a werewolf coming of age story. Even though our main character is unnamed, it just feels so personable, so real. This is a character study. It's a very character driven book, and the book is written in like a series of vignettes. I really love the way that this is done. Stephen Graham Jones has such an interesting writing style, and I love that he plays around with different writing styles and techniques and storytelling techniques. In this one we have, I believe, all of the odd chapters are our main character and he is talking to you, the reader, narrating his story and his experiences. Every even chapter you still get like the point of view of our unnamed protagonist, but it is like written in third person and he won't describe himself as himself. He'll describe himself as the fugitive or the traveler. He'll have like a small little role in those vignettes, and I just thought the way that this all came together was so wonderful. I think my character-driven readers are really going to love this one, and I know I've talked a lot about how just sentimental and how allegorical this one is, but there are a number of very like intense body horror, gore segments in this as well. So I just thought that this is just like a book that has a lot of different categories and really nails all of them. It's coming of age, it's horror, it's allegory, like there's a lot in here, and I just really enjoyed it. So I'm glad that I switched around my TBR and added Mongrels to the TBR, because I think this is the book that is going to stick with me the most out of all of the books that I've read for this vlog. In terms of reading enjoyment, I did like this one on par with The Return by Rachel Harrison. Those are the two books from this vlog that I would recommend. The other ones were, they kind of ranged from just okay to not me liking them so much. Obviously, I would love to get to Ghoul sometime. I'm thinking probably at this point in the year, next year, but of the other books that I read, they were just not for me. But overall, I did read some good books for this vlog, and I had a lot of fun continuing on with this series. The next episode of this series will be coming out next month, and it'll be cosmic horror, so keep an eye out for that. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, leave a comment down below. What is your favorite cryptid horror story? Subscribe to my channel for all of the bookish, cozy gaming, and horror content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye!